All right, so guys, you'll have to bear with me. This is actually my first presentation that I've done on Zoom, so I'm going to see what I can do about sharing my screen. Does this work for everybody? Are they able to see this?
Yeah, they're going to be able to see this, yes.
Okay, cool. So let's get this here. All right, and is that full screen for you guys?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so I just want to say good afternoon for everybody that's able to join us today. I wanted to thank you so much, but also I wanted to reach out to those who are from the MTCCCA and USATF Maine for putting this conference on and available to everybody else. Big thanks to Jamie as well for kicking this off and getting us all involved. I think it's going to be super cool for you guys right now, but also to look back on and maybe get some refreshers on different events and maybe different things that maybe you guys needed some help with as your high school coaching career goes on. So I wanted to say thank you so much. Today, what we're going to be going through is a couple of the more technical field events, the hurdles and the pole vault. As I was putting together some of these notes, I really realized that it's going to be difficult to go into a large amount of depth for either of these within an hour to an hour and a half long presentation. So what I decided to do is I'm just going to kind of focus on the fundamentals and give you just kind of a general overview of each of the events that we'll be going over. Hopefully this is just going to give you some sort of base to go off of for what you decide on your philosophy of coaching the event. But I'm also going to give you guys some time to ask questions after each of the events, but also I'll give you guys my contact information to reach out anytime that you've got it, if you've got some pressing questions that you are hoping to get out of this. So before we get into this, I did want to give you guys some information just about myself, give you a small introduction. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Tristan Wortham. I'm currently one of the assistant track coaches at Husson University. Track has played a huge part in my life, socially, and it helped me really get into college and finish my college career. It's done an amazing thing, and I know that it's one of those sports, because it's so inclusive, it's done a lot for probably a lot of your athletes as well. So it's one of those really cool sports that I've been lucky enough and I've been blessed enough to be a part of. I have some of my accolades mentioned above, but what I really attribute most of that to is the coaches that I've had throughout my career. They've believed in me, they provided me with any necessary equipment, and I thank them so much for everything that they've done and gotten me to where I am today. I attended Brewer High School, and that's in Maine, and I actually tried out for the basketball team my freshman year and got cut from tryouts because I was so terrible. So what did I do? I decided, well, let's go to a place where everybody's welcome. We'll try out indoor track. So I went there, and from there on, I was recruited out of the University of Maine, actually as a multi, doing the decathlon and the heptathlon. But most of my freshman year at Maine, I used to really hone in my pole vault skills. And then I was able to compete a little bit more balanced in the multi and the hep and the deck for the rest of my career there. So now I've been able to take a lot of the experience that I've had at Brewer, at UMaine, throughout some of those meets, and I'm blessed enough to be a coach at the Husson University and get to see a lot of my athletes develop as young men and women preparing for the real world and just helping them along their way as well. So it's been a really cool, fun ride. I'm excited to see where else it takes me. Track is, like I said, one of those amazing sports that opens up a lot of opportunities in a lot of different ways. So it's very cool. After this, or what I really want to see from this presentation, what I hope that you guys can take away from it, it's that ultimately, as a coach, it's caring, encouraging, and being involved that's really going to set up your athletes for success, no matter the event. Believing in your athletes, and that can influence them way more than any workout plan or any other event that they're in. If you believe in them and if you really truly help them through what it is they're going through, they're going to take things away from a lot longer than they normally would have. So to get into this, I've narrowed down some of the important factors that's going to help up your athletes for success in the hurdles. So I've got body awareness, rhythm, repetition, consistency, confidence, and knowing their limits. And again, for those of you that just joined on the call, I'm just going to be going over some basic fundamentals. If there's anything that maybe I missed or there's some gaps that you'd like filled, I really strongly encourage you guys to ask questions so that we can talk about them, or again, reach out anytime. So here we go. When you're starting a new hurdler, or even actually developing advanced hurdlers at the start of the season, what I believe is one of the most important things is going to be their body awareness. When you've got somebody who is going full speed and tasked with jumping over some sort of object, you're going to want to make sure that they can control themselves and they can do it in a safe manner, but also that body control is going to translate and help them keep their acceleration between the hurdles and finish out the race. I mean, this body control, this is going to translate throughout the 55 meters, 110 hurdles, 300, 400. So these characteristics are so important. I mean, even in the steeplechase, they're jumping over this large body of water. They're going to want to make sure that they know what they're doing in the air correctly. That's going to help them maximize their velocity going over and in between. So some basic terms that we're going to be going over. First is really just the lead leg. The lead leg, that's going to be the first leg that really attacks the hurdle. A lot of coaches see this lead leg as fanning out, like they're jumping the hurdle, but they've got to have this straight leg that goes over. That's really hurting their speed. If they're going over with a fanned out straight lead leg, it's taking a lot longer for it to get back down to the ground and continue accelerating. So what you want to look for, and actually one thing that I'll have you think about, is your hurdler's lead leg should never go foot and then knee going over the hurdles. You want to always have it go knee and then foot. So that's going to be kind of a knee drive going over. We're driving over the hurdle rather than just hopping over it awkwardly. It's going to help them have that slightly bent knee so that they can get back down on the ground, continue accelerating. And you're going to have different lead legs. So you've got some people that are going to be lead leg rights, lead leg left, just depending on what they're comfortable taking off of right before the hurdle. You definitely want to make sure that one of your hurdlers are comfortable with both of them, because you don't know if they're ever going to have a time in the race, if it's 110 or 55 meters or whatnot, where they're going to have to switch and they need to be able to be confident to have that lead leg going forward. The 300 hurdles, you're more often, or 400 hurdles, you're definitely going to be switching those legs. So training them on both those legs is extremely important. Even if they say, well, I'm never going to use it, they're going to use it at some point. So remember, keep that knee first and then foot, and that lead leg is going to be a lot quicker for them. We've got the trail leg as well. The trail leg is going to be that second leg to kind of clear the hurdle. It kind of looks like a chicken wing type thing when it's coming over after it's trailing. The biggest focus with the trail leg that you guys are going to be looking for, that's going to be, it's nice and high and tight and close to the body, so that it's not kind of, and I'll talk about it a little bit more with the balance, it's not setting the body off balance by extending too far out. But you also want to keep it nice and quick. So that tightness, that quickness is what's going to help it fling back, or fling forward and continue the running motion. If they're just having that trail leg where it kind of just flops over and then lands right in front of the hurdle, that's going to be decelerating them. It's going to be stopping them right in the mud, and then they're going to have to try and build that speed back up in order to get to the next hurdle. So I like to think of it as a high, tight, rotating trail leg that's going to continue their stride and help them get to the next hurdle as well. So the key on the hurdles with both the lead and the trail is really getting those legs back down in runner's position as quickly as possible, because the whole name of the game is continuing that speed. You're not letting that hurdle decelerate them as they're continuing throughout the race, because the more the hurdles, obviously they're going to slow down. So you want to make sure that getting over that hurdle is not going to decelerate them as much. They want to be accelerating as much as possible, or at least coasting and keeping that same speed. So next, I just wanted to go over a couple quick things for any new coaches that maybe have never coached hurdles or never done it themselves. Some things that they can know that's going to help their language with their athletes, but also hear stuff as they're trying to explain it. We've got the notches on the hurdles, on all hurdles. There's different notches on the side of the hurdle, and that's going to determine the height of the hurdle. So like if you hear something like, we're going to be doing it at 3 notches showing, that's normal for a boy's height. usually in the 55 or the 110 hurdles, which is roughly, it's going to be 39 inches. Or you'll see, hey, we've got one notch showing that's going to be like a girl's height, which is 33 inches. And then also that is also going to be for your 300 and 400 hurdles as well. So a lot of the time, and what I like to do with my athletes, especially in the beginning of the season, is I'm not going to be having them practice at competition height. The whole focus in the beginning of the season, throughout the season, is, and I'll get into it a little bit more, is really developing that confidence so that they feel comfortable going over the hurdle. And it's no longer an object for them to avoid, but it's an object for them to drive forward. So a lot of the time I'll bring it one notch lower. So, you know, I'll have the boys practicing in high school, I'll have them practicing at maybe 2 notches showing. The women will have that all the way down so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable getting over that with some of the earlier practices. So that's going to be what we're talking about for notches. You can also hear holes or whatnot with that as well. So the last term that I'm going to go over before I really get into the meat of the hurdling is the stepping. So there's different types of stepping. You can hear 1-step, 3-step, 4-step, 5-stepping. I tend to use, what that stepping is how many steps they're taking in between the hurdles, in between each of the hurdles. So a 5-step, that's normally going to be like when they're warming up, maybe they're doing their hurdle mobility drills when they're getting started, but it's also a time for new hurdlers to really become comfortable, confident with the actual weird hurdling technique. So it slows it down where they're taking less, or they're taking more steps. They're generally going at kind of a jogging, bouncing pace. So it gives them an opportunity to feel comfortable, but then also kind of slows it down for you guys so that you can see what is it that they need to work on when they're attacking the hurdle? What is it that they need to work on in between the hurdle? Are they stutter stepping? Are they doing this? How can you keep those steps consistent? So the 5-step is a good warm up for them. It gets the muscles loose, but it's also really good as coaches for you to kind of take a look and see what's going on at a slower pace, and athletes can get a good feel for it as well. A lot of the times in high school, you'll have your boys and some girls 3-stepping throughout the entire race. That's taking those, you know, they've got 3 steps in between each hurdle, which can generally be a little bit more difficult. And they're going to keep that same lead leg. If you can control an odd number of steps throughout each hurdle, you're always going to have that same lead leg, which is kind of nice for those who might not be comfortable with an opposite lead leg. Of course, a lot of people, a lot of high schoolers don't have the speed, or they don't have the leg length to get 3 steps in. They have to take that extra 4th step, which is no problem whatsoever. The only issue is naturally they're going to be switching that lead leg. So that's where it comes into play. They really need to be comfortable with both of those lead legs. Now that we've got those basic definitions out of the way, I did want to get into just some key elements of hurdling. The first is the body awareness, like I've been talking about. One of the big things that I'll teach to new hurdlers, or I'll emphasize to hurdlers as they're starting up again, is that vertical line of symmetry on their body. The reason why is because they're in the air going at pretty quick speeds. So any little movement that they make is going to have a counter movement, just with the natural way that the body wants to balance itself and rebalance itself. So it's extremely critical for a hurdler to have that. And what you can see in the picture that I included is there is that vertical line that goes down. That's the line that I'm kind of talking about, going down the center of the body. And so when you're hurdling, and you'll start to notice this when your hurdlers are going and they're going over the hurdle, and maybe they're twisting a little bit, or they're coming down from the hurdle and then they keep twisting. That twisting motion, that horizontal motion that they have, is taking away from the forward motion that they're having. So any little bit of energy that's going back and forth or twisting side to side is taking away from moving forward, which is the whole focus of the hurdles, is driving forward as quickly as you can, so the next hurdle is easier, and the next hurdle is easier, and then you can finish hopefully with a quicker time. So what you really want to look at is when they're twisting, a lot of the time it's because those driving arms are crossing that line of symmetry. A lot of, and I wish that you guys could see, or Jamie and I were talking about this earlier, that it'd be nice if rather than a virtual thing, that we had a live presentation so that I could show you guys but try and visualize it with me. When they're going over, let's say they're a lead leg right, and they're punching forward with their left arm. Then they're crossing that line of symmetry. They're a lot of the time, the reading of the watch example, which is no problem, they're overextending. And so when their shoulders start to cross and their arm starts to go to the other side, then that other arm realizes, or your body realizes, geez, I am overloading on this right side, I need to adjust. So then the right arm is going to kind of come out as a wing and twist back so that you have that balance, and you end up having that twist until you have to regain you guys' balance or their balance. So what I like to teach is having those hurdlers punch forward, punch up, punch. They can go do that, read the watch where they're looking down, but try to have them not cross over that body so that they minimize the amount of twisting as possible and keep all of the momentum going forward. And one thing while I'm going about the body awareness is you want to make sure that you put it through the athlete's heads that they're not jumping over the hurdles, they're going to be driving over or driving through the hurdles. When they have the assumption that they're running and jumping over the hurdles, all of that energy that's supposed to be going forward is now going up. You know, they start thinking, I need to jump over this, I need to clear this, when really it's better to have them smash through it as hard as possible, because we want everything to go forward. Obviously, we don't want them smashing through it the whole way down, but you want to drive it through their head that they're supposed to be driving through that hurdle. They're supposed to continue their acceleration through that hurdle so that they can get to the next one. If we're jumping up and then coming right back down, we're not giving ourselves enough room to keep going at a good speed or a consistent speed. So, and then the other bullet point I did have there, but I didn't mention, is that runner's pose. So keeping that trail leg nice and tight, rotating back into to continue running through and minimizing the awkwardness of going over the hurdle as much as possible and keeping that thing straight. Next, what I wanted to get into is the rhythm. No matter the distance of the hurdle race, whether it's the 300, 400, and so on, rhythm is so important, not just for you as a coach to see that what they're doing is consistent and they're keeping this solid rhythm, but it's really good for the hurdler as well, because they have to have that, you know, that feeling of, okay, here we go, I'm right on the mark, let's go forward. So you want to instill in them that rhythm of what you're supposed to be listening for, what their body is supposed to be feeling. And then it's going to eventually turn into this cognitive way of, okay, this is what it needs to sound like, to the body now starts to feel that this is right. This is what I want to do. And if things are off, they'll be able to tell, where's my rhythm coming off? What's going on? And so that rhythm that you guys are going to be looking for, that rhythm that you're going to be hearing for, with 3 steps, they're going over the hurdles, you're going to hear ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. That's what you're going to hear through each hurdle all the way throughout the race. If you start hearing ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, you know that they're slowing down, and you can tell either something's happening going over the hurdle, or they're slowing down so much that you need to address where they're not driving forward enough, or they're not carrying that trail leg over enough. So you want to keep that same ba-da-ba-ba for the 3 steps. Of course, for the 4 steps, you want to hear that consistent rhythm of ba-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. So that's what you're listening for. That's what they're trying to feel, so that they are more comfortable, more confident going through those hurdles. And that same rhythm, like I said, in the 300 and the 400, that's so important, because if they're 1 step off, it could throw off their entire race. So although theirs is going to be, you know, more steps, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 steps in between each hurdle, you want to make sure that that rhythm is still the same, so that they know where they're at in the race, and they know what they've got left in the tank, and they know what leg is going to be coming up on the next hurdle. Instead of just trying to take a guess, maybe stutter stepping, they know, okay, I'm on 12 steps here, I've got 3 or 4 more to go. That means I'm going to go off on my left foot. I'm going to be confident, comfortable going throughout the race. So keeping that rhythm is super important. And one way that you guys can do that, instead of saying, hey, you're slowing down or this, there are techniques, there are workouts that you can emphasize creating rhythm. A lot of the time, rhythm comes off because athletes are intimidated by the hurdles. They aren't intimidated by the height, they're intimidated by the distance between them. So if you've got an athlete that's slowing down right before the hurdle just because they're unsure about it, take the hurdles away, put tape down on the ground, use some mini hurdles. I know, and I'll get into this a little bit later, for a lot of high school coaches, they don't have facilities, they don't have equipment that they can use. So you can make do with either mini hurdles, or you can put down things on the ground, or tape, and have them at the distance that a hurdle is going to be, so that you can have them feel what it's like to actually have that distance and get 3 steps in or get 4 steps in, rather than them thinking, geez, I can only get 5, or I can only get 6 in between. Have them understand, no, this is the distance. All you're doing is clearing something. Get that feeling. So after you repeat and repeat and repeat, you'll start to understand, and things will get a little bit easier as they move up to larger hurdles. Another thing that you can do too, and I've got it mentioned down below, is bunched or jammed hurdling. All that really means is just moving in the hurdles a little bit closer. So you've got, you could take in all of the hurdles 1 footstep, or 2 of your feet. And that's going to make them, it's all about creating confidence. It's all about making them comfortable, so that when they're ready for the next step, they can do that in a nice transition, rather than letting fear hold them back. So bringing those in, making those a little bit lower, that's going to help with that rhythm. And then you can continue to get them out and higher to normal distance once they start to have that internal metronome inside them. The next slide that I wanted to go over with our hurdles is the repetition and consistency. I've talked about it a decent amount, but it's all about that. In the hurdles, you want to keep that repetition and consistency. And for those high schools that maybe don't have the access to facility every day of the week, you can still practice that consistency and that repetition by mapping out innovative ways to help them practice their rhythm, or have them drive over a hurdle or something like that. But as long as you can get the muscles moving in a way that they're comfortable going over the hurdles for the next facility day, that's what's going to be important. With the consistency thing as well, I did want to talk about how, with everything that you do, repetition and practice is going to create some sort of habit. Everyone knows that, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit, it depends on how you practice it. So as a coach, the things that you want to look for, you want to look for that tight body control going over. You want to harp on that. You want them to practice at that, so that they get to a point where they can go to the next step much easier. There's a lot of times, especially in high school track, where maybe something's working for them right now and helping them get to a point where they're doing really well currently, but they can't reach that next mark, or they can't reach that next time without addressing this one thing, which then they've got to retroactively change that. And you see a little bit of a dip in their production. So take it on first thing. Make sure that they're practicing the right stuff. Make sure that they're creating those good habits, so that you don't have to, or you can minimize the amount of decline in their progression, so that they can get to that next level or get to that next step. So you want to make sure that they're consistent with that they're repeating. One of the big consistency factors, especially in the hurdles, that not a lot of coaches realize, is that first hurdle. It's one thing to think, oh, well, they run a 15-second 100, or they run a 12-second 100. So their block start should get them to the first hurdle the same way every single time. But not a lot of the time it does. So you definitely want to have your hurdlers practice off the line, practice with, a clap or a gun, so that, or practice out of blocks, so that they're comfortable going to that first hurdle. What you want to look for is at least 8 steps. You want to see 8 steps from the line right to the first hurdle, and it needs to be consistent every single time. If you've got somebody that's running 8 steps to the first hurdle, and then the next round they're going 9 steps, they're going to be switching that lead leg, which is going to throw them off, and it's going to throw them off for the rest of the race. If they're 3-stepping, then they're doing the whole race on their bad leg. Or if they're used to 4-stepping and going right, left, now they're going left, right. It's going to completely throw them off mentally and their muscle memory. So you want to make sure and keep on that first hurdle, practicing that first hurdle out of the blocks, out of the gun, and making sure that they're getting those 8 steps in consistently to that first hurdle, so that it can set them up for the rest of the race. One quick thing that helps me when I'm developing my athletes to work on that first hurdle is setting up tape where the ideal foot placement should be out of the blocks, and then until the first hurdle. So we'll kind of analyze where an 8-step should be and give them some sort of parameter so that they can visually see and practice and practice and practice until they get to a point where it's just natural at that point. So you can do that on rollout mats, you can do that at a facility, but making sure that they're consistent to that first hurdle is imperative to the rest of the race. It's going to set them up for any of the race if they can keep that consistent first hurdle out of the blocks. The last thing I'm going to wrap up on the hurdles before we go into any questions and answers for that is the confidence. Confidence in no matter what you do is going to set them up so well, or it's going to completely let them fall. No matter what the track event is, if you're creating confidence in your athletes, it can go a super long way in their development of that event. When the athlete's confident, they're going to become competitive during practice. It's going to help them get over that next hurdle or get them to that next spot. And hurdles is one of those events that can really, really beat someone down. It can destroy their confidence because maybe the hurdle feels too high, or maybe the hurdles are too far. And the practice that they had that they were confidently 3-stepping today or yesterday, they can't get today. So by using different ways, by encouraging your athletes, or even creating your workouts based off of athletes, what they need to work on. In the example of someone who was doing well 3-stepping on day 1, on day 3 is now having a really hard time getting those 3 steps in, then say, hey, today, guys, we're going to be working on our control in between the hurdles. We're going to be bunching them up a little bit, bring them in a little bit, get that confidence back up for that hurdler so that they're confident throughout the rest of the practice and that they can work through whatever it is that they're going through. So you can kind of manipulate those practices or those workouts for each individual athlete so that they're not feeling left out, or they're not feeling like things aren't going the way that they should be. So that's super important in boosting the confidence and just encouraging. I know that was something with me in high school that I responded to really well. I liked to know that I was doing a good job for my team. And when I wasn't doing that, I would get real down on myself, which would affect my performances. It would affect my practices. So by having my coaches reach out to me and say, this is what we're looking for, you're doing a great job, but let's tweak it here and it's going to get you here. And I would get motivated, I'd get excited, and my practice would do well. And then my competition would follow with the meet adrenaline that everybody gets. So just keep on there, don't give up. Make sure that their athletes are confident, and a lot of that's going to come from that repetition, the consistency, and you guys building them up as well and creating workouts that are going to help them out as they progress. So if anybody's got any questions, again, I was just kind of going over some basic stuff on the hurdles to see what I could fit in. But if there was something that you guys were wondering about, please, right now is the time, ask away. If I don't know the answer, I can promise you that I'll find it, I'll research it, and we'll talk about it later. We can email. But yeah, I want to open this up. If anybody's got something they want to talk about, again, they can email me anytime and we can go from there too.
I have a question, Tristan,
Yeah.
regarding stepping. So I know a lot of my athletes, they want to strive for that 3-step. And I'm thinking of one in particular who just graduated. She was shorter, and therefore the like you mentioned, the 3-step was harder for her. But she was an athlete that was very driven to be successful. She wanted to be good. And it was hard for her to stay confident, especially when she couldn't or had limitations around the 3-step. Now, my question kind of around that situation is, obviously for her like success, we should move to the 4-step. However, for her like success and growth in the event, her desire was to be competitive.
Right.
So, do you think a 4-stepper and I guess this is a pure opinion question. Do you think she should have spent her time with hurdles? Because she was more than she was a multi-athlete as
Yeah,
well. You
yeah,
like to try other things. You like to do a lot of different things. Should she, like, being kind of trapped in the 4-step because of her body limitations, should
yeah.
she have kind of moved on to another event? Or would she still be, or can she still be competitive even at a college level with the 4-step?
I think at the high school level, you can definitely be competitive in the 4-step. College, it's a little bit more difficult because you're taking one extra step. You're on the ground longer and more often than someone who's 3-stepping the entire race. So for those who the body limitations, and I actually have some people on my track team at Husson who they're so competitive and they want nothing more to 3-step. And I honestly believe that they can do it. But it's at a point where you don't want to be developing something so hard when maybe it's going to affect them for the rest of the season. You don't want to do something where you're like, well, yeah, let's move these in and let's really work on it. And then when it comes time for a meet, they get that first 3-step in between the first hurdles, but then they have to revert back to the 4-step, and now they're not comfortable because they haven't been practicing it. So one thing that I've been doing with my athletes is I've been taking some time for those who are currently 4-stepping who would like to 3-step and using a portion of the practice to bring the hurdles in a little bit more. I'll be either doing some bunched or jammed, or there's even a workout that I like. It's called cycle timing. So where the first hurdle's in 1-foot steps, and the second hurdle's actually in 3-foot steps, and the third hurdle's in 5-foot steps. So it gets a little bit shorter as they go on, so that as they start to lose a little bit of speed, they will still be able to make that 3-step. So I think it's important to still practice them with that, because as the season goes on, they're going to get faster. You know, for these indoor athletes, they might not be doing something in the fall, so they're going to get quicker. They're going to be doing speed workouts. So there might be a way for them to do it. But there are those athletes that have the height limitations. They do have the speed limitations. And unfortunately, at the college level, 4-stepping can be competitive, but it's very difficult to get to that higher level. So to kind of go back, what is it that she should do, or what should she have done if maybe she wanted to compete at the college level? I guess it really depends on how our other events are looking. I mean, is there an event that she could have done very well in that maybe hurdles was taking away from, or how does she rank versus the other events? I guess you want to kind of play it out by, all right, well, the hurdles is great. Started interested by D1 schools or D2 schools or whatever it's going to be. And that's where you kind of figure it out and play it by ear. Of course, as a high school coach, you also want to try and maximize the most amount of points as possible. So there is that factor as well. So to shorten that answer a little bit, I'm never going to expect somebody to 3-step when they don't have the physical capabilities of it. But is it impossible? No. You just need to adjust the workouts to get them there while continuing to have them practice on what they're going to be doing during competition days, so that it really doesn't drive them deep down into the dirt saying, before I did all this, I could at least 4-step, and now I can't even do that. So it's important to practice both, but maybe you look at the bigger picture and say, where is it that they're looking? And then I can help them develop to continue their career in track. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Thank you so much.
For sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've never hurdled. I can grasp the indoor hurdles with 5, but the stamina that it takes to do the 10 outdoors, I can't. Tell me what it feels like in terms of you as an athlete, your focus, what's going on in your head, because I can't.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't.
It's so different.
Yeah.
It's so different. And I remember in high school thinking, oh, like my first high school outdoor meet throughout all years, you would think, oh my gosh, I miss indoor so much because it was so short. You would say, I can't believe I've got to double the amount of hurdles here. How was I complaining about 5 hurdles or 6 hurdles or whatever it was indoor? But throughout the season, it becomes natural. You start to realize, okay, well, this is how it is. And if you're starting to get fatigued at hurdle 7 or hurdle 8, which tends to happen with a lot of athletes, that just means you got to get your conditioning up. You can't just be practicing hurdles 24/7 because you could have the best technique whatsoever, but when your body starts to fail, your technique's going to start to fail as well. So really focusing on that conditioning, I would do, and I did this with a lot of my athletes as well. Unfortunately, we had a very limited spring season this year, so it was a little bit more difficult, but have them do back-to-back hundreds. Have them do a ladder tree where they're doing 100, 200, 300, 400, and then back down 300, 200, 100, so that they're getting that feeling of what it's like to hurdle when they're tired. So you can have them do, like, let's say, have them sprint a 100, give them a 30-second rest, and then tell them, I need you to go down the hurdles. We'll bring the hurdles in, we'll drop them a little bit, and we'll practice going down a full set of hurdles, or we'll do 6 hurdles, or we'll do 7 hurdles, so that they can feel what it's like to hurdle while they're tired and work on that form, which is important too. A lot of the times you'll have your hurdlers start at the beginning of the practice, and they're fresh and great. But what they don't realize is when their body starts to fail is, what is that technique going to look like? What do I need to do extra towards the end of the hurdle race? And that's going to tie in too to the 300 and the 400 hurdles as well. Because at the end of a 400 without hurdles, you're dead. Your legs are gone. They feel like rubber. So practicing, trying to create a meet-like symptoms during practice is super important. Have them run a 400 and then have them run the hurdles, or have them do an 800 workout with 2 hurdles on the track for them to go over when they're gassed. So practicing those meet conditions, practicing the body conditions. I'll tell you what, in the beginning of the season, 110 hurdle is exhausting. You're at the end and you're like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? At the end of the season, it's just normal. You're used to it. Your body's used to it. You get to that 10th hurdle and you're like, oof, you know, that wasn't too bad. It was 15 seconds, 16 seconds, whatever it is, 20 seconds, not bad at all. So again, that repetition, that practice, but also practicing when their body's fatigued is going to help them a long way throughout the rest of the season and keep their body in shape for it.
Tristan, kind of on the note of conditioning, should they, you know, as far as a high school team where unfortunately we're not all lucky enough to have like a specific hurdles coach that can focus on just our hurdlers,
right?
Should they be participating in like the sprint workouts, like the speed?
Definitely.
And then be focusing on like the hurdles kind of like after, say, a workout or whatnot? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's great because, you know, the hurdles is a sprint. So having them work on those hurdles is great, work on the sprinting is great. And then having them hurdle is even better because now they're doing it a little bit more fatigued. One thing that you can do too, and depending on the track, and if your distance runners are off doing their own thing, or maybe they're in lane 1, let's say you're doing your sprinting workout in lane 5, then you have your hurdlers do the same exact thing, but in lane 4 and set up some hurdles. So they're doing that sprinting workout while they're still getting that hurdle work in, and you don't have to be stretched as a coach from going from one end of the track to the other. So definitely have them do those sprint workouts, because if you guys don't have a hurdle coach necessarily, it's hard for you to keep track of what they're doing. So I definitely agree. And then the conditioning workouts too. Have them do the conditioning workouts and maybe throw a hurdle in at the finish line so that they've got to finish off with that, or throw in a couple hurdles at the end so that they're comfortable. Awesome. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that. That's a crazy idea. I don't know why I've never thought of it. Just throw in a hurdle. That makes so much sense. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else that you guys can think of before I move into the next section? Cool. Again, email me anything. If something pops up and you're like, oh shoot, you know, actually what I wanted to talk about, I forgot, or he didn't mention, just email me. I'll have my stuff at the end of the slide, and Jamie's got it as well, so reach out to him. So what I'm going to get into next is the pole vault. Pole vault is such a weird event. It's so crazy. Nobody understands it unless you do it. or unless you have a physics background. But it's such an odd event that just doesn't make sense. I wanted to open this up with a little story about how I got into pole vaulting. I remember my senior year, I was in the van with two of my coaches headed to the New England Championship. And we were just talking and hanging out, and we were laughing about how I got cut from every other sport except for track, and that's what led me to there. And I asked him, I was like, well, hey, I mean, I had never pole vaulted before, obviously. How did you even think to get me involved? Because I never asked for it. I mean, I remember seeing it at a meet and thinking, geez, that's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But I never asked for it. They just randomly came up to me one day and said, hey, would you like to try it? And I was like, sure. And, and the rest was history. So I asked them, I was like, what made you look at me and say, that guy's a pole vaulter? And they were like, well, the guy, our pole vaulter on the team, he was on a missions trip in Argentina, and we didn't have anyone in the vault. And we had this big meet coming up that we really needed to score some points in. And there was not a lot of vaulters going on in there. So we thought it was an easy way to get some points. I'm like, that makes total sense. You're trying to maximize the amount of points that you're in during the meet. But that still really doesn't, like, why me? He then followed it up with, and then we just searched for whoever the spaciest kid was that we could find on the team that wouldn't care about flinging themselves up in the air and not being fearful about it. So I was like, well, that I guess makes sense. That story makes, it puts what coaches view the pole vault to a T. They're looking for ways to find some points. They're looking at maybe a really athletic kid, but they're also looking for maybe somebody, and this was maybe just in my case, but a lot of the time they're like, who's the kid that's not going to think that this is dangerous? Who's just going to go for it? And because if you're going to be hesitant about the pole vault, you're really not going to succeed. You have to have this, you can't have that healthy fear of flinging yourself 15, 16, whatever feet in the air. So what I want to try and do, same thing with the hurdles, is go into this understanding that maybe you guys don't have a whole lot of info about the pole vault or know exactly how it works using physics. I was talking to my brother-in-law, who he's actually a head soccer coach over at Husson as well, talking to him about us talking today and doing this presentation, and he's like, well, how hard could the pole vault be? You grab a pole, you run, you throw it in a box, and you jump. I'm like, well, I guess, but there's so much to it, and there's so many safety precautions that I think it's really important for us to just go through. And again, towards the end, if you guys have questions, we're going to have time for that. And we're also going to be able to give you guys my email so that we can talk over that as well. So we're going to try and go through some of the basics, the fundamentals, the basic terms of the pole vault. But what I really want to emphasize is being safe, having your athletes be safe. This can be one of the most dangerous events in track and field. So maintaining a safe environment and making sure that your athletes understand how to safely vault is going to be extremely important. And the other thing that I'm going to go over as well is going to be that same sort of, high schools don't have a lot of the same access to facilities that a lot of other high schools do, or maybe they don't even own a pole. Maybe they don't know where to get maps, but they've got a small window where they can do it, and maybe they can maximize on some points. I'm going to give you guys some ways that you can develop your vaulters without anything. So things that I've had to do throughout the years, as an athlete, but even as a coach, to help develop my athletes in a time where they don't have a facility to actually run down, put a pole in a hole, and try to vault pretty high in the air. So we'll go over some of that too, but like the hurdles, we're going to start with some basic terms on the pole vault. The first is short grip. This is, I think, the most appropriate thing to start with because it's the first thing that a pole vaulter is going to start with when they first learn and even when they warm up. So what a short grip is going to be is you're going to have your vaulter stand next to their pole. They're going to raise their right hand as high as they can. And now this is for those who jump off of their left. They're going to be raising that right hand as high as they can on the pole. Bring the pole back down, and then they're going to essentially reverse grip with their left hand, shoulder width apart. That's going to give you your short grip, what you're going to practice on, what you're going to learn on. On the opposite end, for those who are lefty vaulters who jump off of their right foot, they're going to be raising that left hand as high as they can, grabbing there, and then doing the opposite from there. And And that short grip hand is going to be very important when I get into the number of hand grips, because that's how you measure how high you're gripping on the pole, so that your athletes can remember, this is where I was holding on this day, keep everything consistent. This is what the pole was doing when I was holding at X amount of hand grips. So that means I need to do it this way. So it's going to be a really good measurement tool for you guys and for them to figure out where they're at in the pole vault process. When they're doing the short grip, they're going to be holding, it's roughly going to be a little bit less than half the length of the pole, depending on how tall your athlete is and depending on how long the pole is, but it's going to be a little bit less to right around halfway up the pole. And what they're going to be doing is taking like a really easy jog, usually a 3-step approach, or sometimes a 4-step approach, or just a really basic jog to the pit, planning, jumping. And they're going to be practicing what it feels like when you're planning a pole, jumping, knee driving, swinging, inverting, whatever it is, at a really slow, controlled, safe manner. Again, you want to do this with your beginning vaulters, but you also want to do this with your advanced or intermediate vaulters when they're warming up, because pole vault uses many different aspects of the body, and doing these short grips is a nice controlled way for them to not lose or get fatigued easily and not lose energy, but also warm their body up in the exact same way that they're going to be vaulting at top speed. Number of hand grips, I brushed on that a little bit. Essentially, that's going to come into play when the vaulter begins their progress moving to the pole, or trying to get their pole to vertical as quickly as possible. Like I said, it's a good way for you to measure where they were, where they are, what they need to be at. So we're essentially taking the top hand on the short grip, and you're going to be moving up from there. So we've got 2 hand grips up. You're going to go 1 hand grip, 2 hand grip above where you're holding in the short grip, and then that's where your top hand's going to be. If you're trying to do 2 hand grips below, then yeah, we'll be taking wherever that short grip is, or wherever that grip was before. We're going to be gripping 2 hand grips below. A big focus on that is the lower that you grip on the pole, the quicker the pole is going to reach vertical. And we'll get into penetration later, but they'll be penetrating a little bit quicker. Things will be a little bit easier, but of course, the lower you grasp on the pole, the lower the maximum height that you can go on that pole is going to be. So it's finding that balance of what the ability of the vaulter is going to be and how high they can grip on the pole. So the higher that they grip on the pole is going to slow down the pole moving to vertical, but it's also going to introduce some other things that the pole is designed for. If you're holding pretty low on the pole, it's going to prevent the pole from bending, or it's going to prevent it from doing what it's actually made to do. It's going to be more of like you're grabbing a stick in the woods and hopping over a puddle type thing, where it's just straight vaulting, which is great to do, but when you're trying to get some of those bigger heights, or you're trying to move up poles, you want to try and get to the top as possible so that the pole does what it's supposed to do: bend, create that energy, and then shoot that energy back out as it recoils. So without going down a huge rabbit hole, those number of hand grips plays a huge part, and it's up to you guys to figure out what's best for that athlete and what they're ready for and what they're not ready for by moving them up and down. Next, we're going to go right into a number of steps approach. This is a little bit different than like the steps we were talking about in the hurdles. In the hurdles, we were saying a 3-step is going to be 3 steps in between each hurdle, a 4-step, 4 steps in between each hurdle. A lot of the times, you'll hear vaulters say, I'm taking my 8-step approach. That doesn't mean that they're taking 8 total steps. They're actually taking 16 total steps, because you're going to be counting each of their planting foot. So if they're jumping off of their left foot when they're vaulting, at each step that they take on that left foot down the runway is what they count. So they're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And that's what a lot of vaulters do. Again, others are different, where maybe they count each one of their steps and say they've got a 16-step approach. But knowing what approach, or knowing how your vaulters are going, is going to help keep that consistency. So it's important for you to know what pole are they on, how many hand grips are they on, and what is the step approach that they're doing, so that you can continue the next practice, or you can continue to meet exactly where they were before, and you know their limits, and you're not putting them in a dangerous position. I have an app on my phone where I have each one of my athletes. I've got what pole they're on, at what height it's on, what weight it's on, how many steps approaches are they taking, what do they got for hand grips, and it tells me exactly where they should be and what they should. So we're not wasting time figuring that out during the warm-up. The step approach, obviously, there's finding that sweet spot. If you've got an athlete like we were talking about in the hurdles that maybe be getting gassed towards the end of an 8-step approach or whatnot, then maybe it's going to be better for them to go down to a 7-step or go down to a 6-step, so that they're not losing speed as they're getting to the point where they need the most amount of speed. They want to cap out their speed right before they're going to plant. That's where the fastest they need to be. They can't start out fast and end slow. They should, if anything, they should start slow and end fast, because you want to make sure that quickest amount of the approach is going to be helping them with their vault and carrying them through, pushing that pole to vertical. So trying to figure it out, you could have some athletes that might not maximize their speed until they hit 10 steps. I mean, those crazy athletes. So it doesn't hurt for them to be back there, but then maybe you've got an athlete who's vaulting just as high, but maybe they cap out at 6 steps. Then you keep them at 6 steps. You want to know what's best for them. And again, those number of hand grips are going to help as well. Sometimes you won't be able to move up a pole unless maybe they maximize their speed by going up a step approach. So you guys will know with trial and error and what they can and cannot do, but that is something to be aware of. The standards is something that I'm going to talk about that not a whole lot of people understand. That is what holds up the bar above the mat, the bar that they're trying to clear. So what the standards do is it moves it back and forward, so further away from the pit or the box, closer to the box. And when you move them further back towards the back of the mat, that gives your vaulter a little bit more space. Maybe if they're penetrating really well or their pole is moving really quickly, they're going to need a little bit more space to finish that vault. So bringing those standards all the way back or burying them, as a lot of people will say, right in the where they go, as far back as possible, gives them a little bit more space. But then maybe if you need to get them to the closest standards allowed, and either 15.5 or 18 inches for high school. I can't remember what they moved to, but officials will obviously let you know. But making those a little bit closer for those who might be stalling out a little bit, or maybe they're reaching their peak or their hips are reaching a little bit earlier than those that are kind of penetrating a lot cleaner. So you can adjust those to go where the hips are. So I like to kind of stand kind of perpendicular to the box so that I can see a sideways view of where their hips are. And that can kind of tell me a general area of where their peak is of their pike, and we can adjust their standards from there. Again, we've talked a little bit about penetration. Again, that's just going to be trying to get back in the box. If you've got too much penetration, they're going to be shooting out the back of the pit and maybe falling off of the mats in the back. If they've got too little penetration, they're stalling out. They could fall back in the box or even fall backwards and land on the runway. We are going to be talking about some safety mechanisms, but just understand what that penetration means. We're talking about getting that pole to vertical as quickly as possible and landing where you can. One way to measure their penetration quickly and easily is using that white box that's on the mats or using the logo that's on the mat. You can kind of tell where they are. If they land right dead center, you're like, hey, you're looking pretty good. But if they're way off that logo, if they're way in, if they're coming right back down in the box, then you need to make some adjustments or they're going to get very seriously injured. So we'll go into the safety part. To safely vault, the proper equipment is going to be extremely important. That means helmets for states who require it. That means vaulters or even vaulters that are just starting out. It means you keep your mats well maintained, the box is well maintained, your standards are all up to code. What a lot of coaches don't understand is safe vaulting comes from the poles themselves as well. Poles are rated based off of weight. So you'll see a label at the top, and for instance, to help you guys visualize it, let's say you see 145 tapes to the top of the pole. That means that there should not be anybody over the weight, their body weight of 145 pounds using that pole. It becomes extremely dangerous if you've got anybody even a pound over that pole, because the pole has been specifically rated for somebody 145 and below. Now, if you've got someone a very talented vaulter that's 120 pounds or 115 pounds, they can go up to 145, they can go up to a 200-pound pole because it's rated for somebody that heavy, and it might help them push them a little bit higher because it's now a pole that is meant to push somebody that's 200 pounds it's pushing someone that it's 120 pounds, so it's going to push them a lot higher. Again, it's harder for someone that's that light to use a pole. But what I wanted to get at is you can have somebody as light as possible use something that's well over their body weight, but never the opposite. You never have somebody over that weight limit. And I know that at the bigger meets, they are going to be checking for that because they're liable for those athletes as well. So make sure, even if you're like, oh gosh, you know, we've got limited poles, and this pole is a 13-foot 145 and he weighs 150, and we've got and that would be just perfect for him to get to the next height. You can't do it. You're going to be putting your athlete in a really dangerous spot. You can have them cut down on weight or something, but just make sure that you do not have somebody vaulting over the weight limit of the pole. It's extremely important. 145 pounds at 14 feet is still 145 pounds at 16 feet. It doesn't matter how tall the pole is. You don't mess around with those weights. I wasn't going to go into it, but real quick, I know high schools have a mixed bag of poles, from people that got ordered years ago, things that they've held on to for decades. So you might not necessarily have poles that you can move up nicely. I mean, if you've got a vaulter that is really, really killing and really penetrating that 135, 13-foot pole, and you're like, geez, I got to move up, but all we have is a 150, 13-foot pole. That's a big jump. You can do that, but just adjust their hand grips. Bring them down a little bit. Or on that 135, 13-foot pole, if you're holding at the top, that's where it's rated for a 135-pound person. If you go a hand grip down, you're going to be stiffening that pole by about 10, 15 pounds, 20 pounds. So by bringing a hand grip down, it actually can handle someone better, and you'll have a little bit more of an aggressive recoil or uncoil for that vaulter. So if they're really bending that thing, and you know, we don't have a pole for them to adjust, just move them down a hand grip or two and keep their marks really where they're at, and that will stiffen the pole a little bit. So now you've got like a 12-8 145, you know, so you can play with the hand grips to adjust the stiffness of the pole so that you're still maintaining that safe aspect, and you're not jumping them up, or they're not putting them on a pole that they shouldn't be. So kind of keep that in mind. You can stiffen the pole, or you can loosen the pole by adjusting those hand grips as well. One big part of the safety aspect of vaulting is how they're going to land. I can't tell you how many times new vaulters or uncomfortable vaulters or vaulters that go over the bar forward where they're not turning over, and I'll get into that in a second too, but they're going over it like a forward high jump type thing. I'm not sure, but if they land on their legs, if they land on their feet, it's going to be extremely dangerous. They need to be landing on their back. They need to be landing on their rear. Even if they're forward vaulters and they're not turning over yet, they need to land on their side or even their face. That's more safe than landing on their ankles on an unbalanced surface. And it's not structural. If they're landing on a mat from 7, 8, 9 feet, 10 feet, whatever in the air, they're going to roll their ankle. They're going to sprain their ankle. They're going to fall in a hole where the mats come together and aren't joined properly. They need to be landing on their butts. They need to be landing on their backs, or they need to be landing on their sides. They need to get those feet out from underneath them and land properly. So you also want to make sure that they've got good body control. You can see vaulters that go up and they're just absolutely crazy. They're out of control. They're not doing anything well. You want to make sure that they've got that good body control. And I'll get into some things, some groundwork that you guys can work so that they can maintain those aerial body movements and keep control and develop that body control as well. It's going to help them a lot. You can do that through gymnastics. You can do that through other ways that, again, I'll get into. I have it down here when to focus on. These are the uncontrolled conditions. When you get into outdoor vaulting, wind plays a huge factor. Actually, the temperature plays a huge factor. If they've got a big headwind, there's a good chance they're going to be stalling a little bit easier. Their pole's not going to be going to vertical as quickly. If they've got a tailwind, they're going to be shooting out the back a little bit easier. So you want to also make sure that you understand those. The temperature, actually, a colder pole, if it's really cold out, especially up here in Maine in the beginning of the spring season, is going to be a little bit more stiff. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to get. It's going to feel like a tree trunk as they're trying to bend it. So, and then consequently, towards the end of the season, if it's really warm weather, really hot weather, it's been sitting in a bag that's just been baking in the sun, that pole is going to be a lot more flexible for them as well, too. So just keep that in mind when they need to be aware of all of these aspects. And as I've got it on the screen, the safe bailout, if they're not penetrating as much and they're kind of stalling out and coming backwards, you want to make sure they understand how to bail out. That's going to be either holding onto the pole, riding it out until they fall back onto the mat, or if they're coming backwards, they want to make sure that they're aiming where they're going to go. They know where they're going to go. They're not going to fall back on their back on the ground and kind of roll out of that back on the runway if they can. All right, so let's get into the meat of the pole vault. I think this is going to be one of the bigger slides just because there's so many different steps to the pole vault, but I've narrowed it down to 4 different things: the approach, the takeoff, the aerial, and the clearance. It's just going to be a general way for you guys to understand how the pole vault works without getting into all of the really detailed stuff. One thing that you guys can do, and I put it down as a tip, is if you can videotape your vaulters and you use some sort of software, or you use some sort of camera where you can break it down frame by frame or slow motion, it's going to help you significantly realize where the little nuggets of technique that you need to address, because there's so much that goes into the pole vault, from where they're planting, how they're planting, where their knee is, how they're swinging, where's their shoulders, where's their head, where's everything. You're going to need to be able to have something because you won't be able to see it at full speed. So get something to videotape, watch them, and you'll be able to break it down, compare it with other vaulters, and see what you're supposed to be looking for, especially on these techniques that I'll be going over. So that should be super important. The way that the vault first starts is going to be the approach. The focus, like I was saying, isn't to just grab the pole and run as fast as you can. You want to make sure that your speed maximizes right before the box, right before you jump. So sometimes you'll see somebody kind of taking it a little bit slow and building it up from the end, maybe bounding a little bit, or if they can maintain that speed, just going right out the gate. But you want to make sure in the approach that the vaulter's tall, that they're holding the pole, and they're controlling that pole drop as it gets to the box. A lot of the time you'll see people hold the pole as high as they can, sprint, then they get to the very end, and then they slam that thing back into the hole, and the pit, and it doesn't do them any justice. That pole needs to be controlled and lightly dropped as they're progressing down the runway, so that they place it into the box and that they can have a controlled jump. The aggressive style really doesn't do anything. It's completely inconsistent, and you need to make sure that you're having that controlled drop. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go down to how you're going to be controlling that. Well, actually, the way that you're going to be doing it is you're going to have that top hand. That top hand they've got from the short grip, or their top hand from where their hand grip is. For left jumping vaulters, it's going to be that right hand. For those who jump off their right, it's going to be their left hand. You're going to have that nice and secured on the hip or the side of the thigh. That's where they're holding the pole up. And as they approach, that hand is going to be following themselves up the right side, or following themselves up the left side, and through the side of the chest, and then up through above the head. The reason that we're doing that is if you've got the pole, and you see it way too often, vaulters holding their pole behind their body or out to the side. They're now planting at kind of a circular motion, or it's uncontrolled, or they're planting in front of the pole. By having that go up the side and slowly dropping and pushing out in front of the head, you're going to be in front of the pole, giving yourself plenty of time to block, plenty of time to swing, and plenty of space for it. You're not going to be behind the pole and getting jammed. So you'll have a lot more control, a lot more power, and you'll be able to load the pole a lot easier by keeping that pole and that hand moving up the side and in front of you. You're going to use that left hand, that bottom hand, almost like a hinge, and you're going to be dropping it. So that's really not going to move a whole lot. It's going to be the top hand that's moving up the side that's going to drop that pole for them consistently. For those who are starting out and don't necessarily understand, or it's just too much for them to think about, I'll usually have my vaulters start with their hand right up by their shoulder, so that, and run that way, just so that they can, it's almost like they're going to be spearing or jousting the box by having it parallel with their eyes. And then they can just shoot it above their heads at the plant. But then they need to understand that starting along the side is going to help them a lot too. So the next approach, we're going to go into the takeoff. The takeoff, that's going to start when they plant the pole into the box, they jump, and they get themselves where they're putting the pole, they're putting as much load into the pole as possible so that it can then transfer the energy towards the end of the vault to them. This takeoff is really it needs to be consistent, and you can tell by the lines in front of the box of where they're taking off. They'll usually have an 8-foot line, 9-foot line, 10-foot line, 12-foot line, etc. And you'll have to see where their foot is landing, because you want to make sure that the distance between where they're holding on the pole to where they're taking off is the same each time. If they're too close, they're going to be cramped. If they're too far away, they're going to be jumping and spearing it a little bit too far. So you want to make sure that they're right above their hand while they're planting. That's where their takeoff foot's going to be. The proper, and it's funny because the picture that I used kind of doesn't show it the way that I would have liked. But you've got this, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth guy where he's got that knee drive. He's coming off his foot, and then he's got that big, strong knee drive, which is great. You want to have an aggressive knee drive as they're jumping. They're not just placing a pole and letting it carry them. The vault is a jump. They want to be jumping as they're planting, getting that big knee drive up, similar to the long jump, which is almost identical with the direction that you're going to be jumping. And then keeping that reverse C. And you can see in the next guy, he's got from that top hand to that bottom extended trail leg, he's got that reverse C look to him. And then he still has that tall knee drive. So that's what we're looking for, is the trail leg and that top hand create a reverse C as they're pushing the pole to vertical and loading it up. And they've got that strong knee drive as well. The next guy is where it's a little bit different. I don't necessarily like how he drops his knee a little bit. I mean, that's going to happen, but elongating is going to put some bend in the pole, but dropping that knee drive kind of brings the energy down a little bit more. So a lot of the time you do want to see that knee drive continue forward and rolling back. Again, just to recap on the takeoff, you're going to be nice and tall, hand above the head, keep that reverse C, get that knee drive nice and strong, and having them jump forward. A lot of the time you'll hear vaulters or vaulting coaches say, well, geez, my left arm keeps collapsing or my right arm keeps collapsing, which is no problem at all. You actually want to collapse so that they can swing backwards. It's just when you plant, if you completely collapse immediately, you're not going to be able to load any of the energy into the pole, because the energy is going right back into your body. If you can create some space between that bottom arm and the pole, you'll be able to load a lot of that energy you built up running down the runway into the pole, and it's going to be a lot easier for them to have space and roll back. So we'll get into the aerial now. We've gotten to the point where they've got that knee drive, they've got that reverse C. That reverse C, that takeoff legs that they're jumping off of, it's not just going to hang there. You're going to kick that thing as hard as you can and meet it up with the knee drive as the body rolls back. A lot of the time, vaulters are going to think, well, I've got these crazy ab strength, which they do, but they think that that's all it is. I'm going to be crunching like crazy and getting myself upside down using pure core, using pure abs. A lot of that can be taken off by that swing, by that big kick on the trail leg. So as they've got that elongated backward C, that then needs to come through as the hips come up. The shoulders then need to drop so that it gives them room, and the head needs to come back so that it gives them room to continue their swing. I mean, if you think about it, and a lot of the time it's difficult to see it unless you're actually doing it, but if your shoulders are forward and your head is forward, you're taking away the ability for the shoulders to roll back and for the body to completely get upside down next to the pole. If your shoulders are crunched over, you can only go a certain height with your legs, and you're completely missing out on the majority of the invert, or getting completely upside down. So dropping those shoulders, dropping the head, getting that big swing back is what's going to get your vaulters upside down. And something that I'll talk about a little bit later is you can do this with rope drills. You can do this with high bar drills, with pull-up bars, where they're holding on to this rope, and tell them, hey, I want you to hold your knee up like a knee drive, and I want you to try to use all of your core whatsoever to get yourself upside down. It's going to be so hard for them to do that, especially when they don't have the momentum of them running, and they're going to realize how difficult and how hard their body is working by just using their core and trying to crunch their way up. Then have them say, all right, put that knee back up, get that reverse seat, kick as hard as you can, and try to get upside down. Now they're going to do that. They'll have some success. They'll say, geez, that's so much easier than just really stretching my core and struggling to get myself upside down. And then kind of notice how they're looking and say, all right, now I want you to have that knee drive up. I want you to kick as hard as you can from all the way back. Now I want you to engage your shoulders. Drop your shoulders and try to pull yourself up as you're upside down with your arms and your shoulders, and drop that head. And you're going to have a much, much easier time getting upside down. I've had vaulters that are like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how much easier it is to vault when I'm not trying to do it like that. So have them, you've got that big kick, you've got that big knee drive, have them roll back, get those shoulders back, and pull themselves so that they're pulling their hips straight, and they're going to have a much easier time. So you can do that with a rope, you can do that with a high bar, you can do that with Olympic rings, whatever you got. Just obviously make sure that you guys have a mat underneath it and they've got supervision. They're not going crazy by themselves. So that's the aerial. And one thing that I'll explain is when you load the pole, when you put some energy into the pole and the pole is bending, wherever your feet are, wherever your hips are, when that pole unloads is where it's going to shoot you. So if your legs are going forward, if your hips aren't completely upside down, if your shoulders are forward, then it's going to shoot you forward. If you're completely upside down, as the pole unbends, it's going to shoot you up. So that's the focus, is we're not swinging just so that we can get into a comfortable place to get over the bar. We're trying to get to that spot before the pole unbends so that it's now shooting us up rather than at a 45-degree angle or shooting us forward. We really want to get ourselves underneath that bend and get as vertical as possible so that when it unbends, it brings us over the top of the pole rather than forward and straight. Clearance, we're going to be turning over. So when they're upside down and that pole unbends, a lot of vaulters have a hard time turning over because it just doesn't make sense, or they've got other things that they're focusing on. One quick hack that I've had getting vaulters to first start turning over and then turn it into muscle memory is if they're, let's say they jump off their left leg, so they're a right-handed vaulter. If you tell them when they're upside down and they're ready for their turnover to cross their right leg with their left leg, you take your right leg and you cross over, the body's going to naturally follow and their body's going to turn over. It's going to be a lot easier. If they're a right-handed vaulter, you want to have them do the opposite, take their left leg and cross over the right leg so that the body will then follow, and that turnover should become pretty easy. As they get comfortable with it, things will get easier. Their pike, you can see in that last picture, his hips are nice and tall. He's creating like a upside down or a triangle where the peak of his hips are over the bar and his hands are over his pole. So that's where you want to be turning over, obviously pushing off the pole and then trying to land on your back and not landing on your feet is most important for them. Quick things just to brush over as coaches, what you guys should be looking for. You want to make sure that you're looking for a controlled drop towards the box. Again, that's going to be on the side of their hip all the way up the side of their chest and then up above their heads. That's what you're looking for when, and again, when you're looking at those slowed down videos, this is what's going to help them have more control and also have a better vault. You want to see where their top hand placement is. Is their top hand in front of them? Is it behind them when they're vaulting? Are they too cramped? Are they pushing the pole to vertical, or are they just kind of holding on for dear life and letting the pole do the work rather than putting the work into the pole? You want to see that knee drive, that aggressive knee drive. They're not just going to be holding on and waiting. They're really going to be pushing that thing by jumping and having that elongated trail leg, creating that reverse C. You do want to see the shoulders. Are they hunched over? Are they backwards? If they're hunched over, you need to get them to roll those shoulders back so that they've got more space to go up. One drill that I've done before is I'll stand behind them while they're vaulting and tell them that I've got a ball that I'm going to be throwing at them, and they need to roll backwards and kick that ball. So it's a good way for them to get their head back so that they can see where the ball is, but also realize that they can't finish the vault unless they completely roll backwards and get that leg behind the pole as well, or behind the bend. You want to make sure where their peak of their hips, are they over their top hand? Are they under their top hand? If they're under the top hand, that means that their invert's not going to be as straight, and they're going to be shooting outwards. If they're upside down when the pole unbends and transfers that energy, then their hips will naturally go over the hand, and that's ideally what you guys want to be seeing when they're loading the pole and unloading it. And then, of course, you definitely want to look for penetration just for safety purposes, but also to see where your standards and locations need to be. If they're absolutely busting through the mats, maybe you bring the hand grips up, or you bring the hand grips down depending on where they're holding. Or if they're not doing too well and they're not getting there, maybe you need to get them to get quicker, or maybe you need to quicken the verticality of the pole. So you kind of got to check what that penetration is, where you can set your standards and what they're looking at. Finally, you guys don't have facilities as much as you would like. Nobody has all that kind of money or the facility themselves. So they've got a lot of in-school workouts. I did a lot of my high school workouts in the school cafeteria. I remember we set up some high jump mats and realized, oh my goodness, the bar is almost touching the ceiling because the drop ceiling was so low. So I know that you guys don't have a whole lot of stuff to work with, especially when it comes to pole vault mats, which are extremely expensive, or some poles in general. So as I went over some of the things like rope drills, ring drills, pull-up bar, high bar drills, those are things that you guys can do to help them work on their core, work on their swinging, work on their inverting. Things like L-ups, I-ups, V-ups, and whatnot. You can kind of see in the picture, this guy's doing kind of like a J-up type thing, where you have them hold like a reverse grip, one arm facing forward, one arm facing backwards, and just having them bring their legs up to a 90-degree angle. That would be an L up 10 times, 3 sets of 10 or something like that. And then we'll get a little bit higher where we get our feet up by our eyes, where we're doing a V up. Or then we start getting to a point where we can get our feet all the way up to the top of the bar and extending for an I. So you can work on your core like that, which is very similar to the pole vault. Reversing that grip helps them realize what your hands are doing when you're actually vaulting as well. If you're just having them both face forward, that's not going to simulate the pole as much as you could if you reverse. Same thing with the rope. You have them hold the rope just as they would the pole. You can even get into some swinging actions with the pole if you have them stand on a platform, come off the platform, and do their swinging motions as the rope swings. Obviously, you want to practice safety with that with a mat, and just analyzing where the surroundings are as well. Some floor drills, just one quick example. If you've got a pole, great, you can have them hold a pole, but if you don't, have them hold a broom or something where they've just got the feeling of holding something in front of them. And I'll do like a 20 by 20 drill where I'll set up 2 markers, either tape or cones or something, that's 20 meters apart. And the goal is for them to get 20 steps in between those meters. And that's not 20 pole vault steps where it's every other leg, it's 20 full steps in between. And what that does is it creates a mentality for the vaulters to stay tall, get their knees high, and helping them concentrate on what their approach is going to be to keep it consistent. It can also be kind of fun when you've got other vaulters in line watching them being like, oh no, you only did 22 or you only did 18. So having them keep those 20 and get those consistent steps in is going to help them as well. Gymnastics, things like walking on your hands, doing handstands, reverse somersaults into a handstand. Those are all ways that they can work on their body awareness in the air and their control when they're not on solid ground. So that's one way. I've done backwards somersaults into handstands over a bungee that I'm holding, and so that they can practice that pike or practice that clearance over it while they're not even using a pole. So that's one way to do it. And then, of course, those approach drills, that's the 20 by 20 drills as well. But you can have them, if you've got a slide box, or if you even have like something that you can set up that slides, like a towel or anything, you can have your vaulters in a big area practice their approach and practice their plant and let the pole slide, or have the slide box slide as they're doing that as well too. That is all I've got just as a quick overview. Pole vault questions, does anybody have anything that I didn't necessarily go over?
Of course. A common error that I have with some of my athletes is that their top hand slid down after they left the ground. So is that more they're holding too high, or is it really this conscious effort to grip it?
A lot of the time they're cramped. So what I would check to see is where are they planting. So if they're planting closer than the distance of the pole. So when you're checking your mark, you want to hold the pole, and you've got a fixed distance between where the pole hits the back of the box and where it's straight above the head, right?
Yeah.
So if they're inside that, then their force is going to create it so that they slide, and they're not pushing it in front of them. Another thing too that forces the hands to slide is when they're doing their approach and they're running down the runway with their arms behind them, because instead of them shooting and pushing the pole forward, they're now rotating it sideways almost and putting it in that way. Instead of pushing the pole forward, they're just placing it, and their momentum is carrying them backwards rather than up, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple ways that I would do to try and fix the sliding is, one, check their mark to see maybe they need to move back so that they're not as cramped and that they are pushing the pole forward, rather than letting themselves get eaten up by the pole. And two, check where they're planting. Oh, and are they just aggressively planting first thing? Is it a consistent drop of the pole which they're placing and then controlling forward? Or are they running, and then as soon as they get to the end, they drop it like a ton of degrees and they've got no control over it, because that's gonna drop their hands as well. So keep an eye out where their hands are as they're approaching. Are they coming up the side and pushing forward, or are they coming around the side and they're falling behind it as the pole shoots them rather than shooting the pole? Hopefully, it's so hard to talk about without showing. I wish more than anything that I could just have a pole that I could show you guys what it looks like. But as they work on that control and they work on that consistency of where they're taking off, they'll have a much easier time really pushing that pole. I think that's the best way that I can explain it, is pushing that pole forward.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else that you guys might think of, or burning questions about the pole vault, the mysteries of the pole vault?
Sure, I can go again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we don't have a big stock of poles. And we have some. We used to have this 15-footer, so we have a few of those. But in general, for the other kids, and we had like a young lady that was on a 130, and we had 2 of those, and one disappeared, and that was her favorite one.
Of course.
And so, but the other one, even though it's a 130, the other one, it was flawless. Every time she went up, she'd go over the bar, and then the other one was just stiffer, I guess. And it was just it was almost luck. You know, it was maybe 75% of the time she had the control to go over. So then I'm like, all right, I have this senior who used to be real consistent, who now has this pole that she's not as consistent. But I would have bought the exact same weight, the exact same length,
right,
a softer pole.
Right.
Yeah. And so I tried borrowing them. I couldn't quite get to the ones I borrowed much better.
Was she bending the pole at all, or was she straight vaulting?
She was bending.
She was, okay.
Bending her old one much better. This one not so much. Yeah. This
one was a little different. And she was holding right at the label, or where were her hand grips?
I assume it was
not sure where she normally is. Well, like at that time, if I don't have a whole lot more poles to work with, and I have no idea where that nice pole went, and this one might be a little bit stiffer, the hope is she's holding a couple hand grips below the label so that you can try and get her to move up a hand grip.
Yeah.
Because if she's able to move up a hand grip, then that makes the pole a little bit less stiff. So you move the mark back a little bit, or her approach a little bit further back, and you move up the pole. And it sounds intimidating to vaulters when they're like, well, geez, I don't want to hold on the top of this thing. Yeah. But the lower you grip on the pole, the stiffer it becomes. So if she had room to go up, then
Right.
it's going to actually help her out. She's going to be taking off a little bit farther from the box, which is something to be getting used to, but the pull's going to loosen up a little bit. If she wasn't bending it, if she was straight vaulting it, I would say move her down a little bit, because it's going to make the pull go a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is vaulters are probably the most mental athletes on the track team. They're so mental. Anything can mess them up. I know it would, like, if I didn't have my certain routine every single time, I'd have to start over and restart, because they're so mental, and all of these different variables like wind, or, oh my gosh, my pole isn't taped the right way, or I don't have my pole that I'm normal with. That really messes with you. So again, a lot of the time that confidence, like, no, look, it's the same pole, it's the same height. It might be a little bit stiffer, but hey, guess what? It's just going to shoot you a little bit higher. You just got to work on getting a little bit faster. You got to work on pushing that a little bit forward and not collapsing as much, loading the pole a little bit more. So encouraging them and getting them out of that mental state is going to help a lot too. But you can try and adjust hand grips to try and soften that up a little bit. Let's say, so you said this is a 130, and what height was it? Do you remember the length?
It was probably 11 and a half, 12.
Okay, let's say it's 11 and a half, 130. If you had, let's say, like a 120, 11 and a half, then you have her move down a couple hand grips. So now she's holding at like 11 feet, but it's now.
You're on a diet.
No, I mean, oh no, sorry, no. So, oh my goodness, I wasn't thinking.
Right.
So yes, yeah. In terms of practice.
Yes. Yeah,
you understand what
that was the problem. It was like, well, this one would really work for you, but you know,
right, but you can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Right, I got you. Yeah, so if you're trying to stiffen a pole, you'll generally want to move down a little bit when you're on the top of a pole. But if you've got some room, maybe bring it up a little bit so that you can loosen it up for her. Or at least just get her to a point where it's like, hey, look, this is all we've got. Or ask around other coaches and see what they've got. But unfortunately, some people aren't willing to play ball as well. But yeah.
No, I had a lot of, I was able to borrow a couple poles at the end of last year, and they just, it still
wasn't the same.
Didn't work. But I definitely appreciated him. Do you have any experience with the group that rents poles down in Massachusetts?
I haven't.
You can get 5 for a certain amount.
Is it Patriot or is that separate?
It's with Patriot, yeah.
Okay.
And
I haven't. I know of people that have, and they've had no issues whatsoever, but I wouldn't know where to start from there or what the costs are or anything like that.
Yeah, it was like, I don't remember. It was like a minimum. You had to get 5, and maybe it was like $500. But in our situation, where we had some newer vaulters coming in this spring, is something I looked into. But it was, the stock was kind of empty by December.
Yeah.
And it was like Holy Cross took 15, and all these colleges took these massive amounts. Yeah. And I'm like, I just need a 130 that's soft,
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it's such a chess game, because you're trying to figure out the best pole, the best height, where they're supposed to be. The other thing with your vaulter, how many steps was she taking? Do you know, or do you remember?
Probably 10. I wasn't specifically
like 10 total.
Ball coach, yeah.
Well, you could have asked. You could have played around. Like I've done it with some of my vaulters. Where during practice you'll say, hey, let's take a couple extra steps.
Yeah.
Let's see what that does. Maybe we can get that speed up a little bit, and then it doesn't matter that this is a little bit more stiff because you're bringing a little bit more velocity.
Right.
So you can play around. Again, the hand grips. If you're limited on poles, the luxury of the pole vault is, especially at the high school level, is you can play around with figuring out where their max speed is going to be by working with their number of steps or working with their hand grips as well to try and manipulate the pole as much as you can.
Okay. And my last question, so I let Jamie get in there. again, we look at our stock of poles. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're 15, 20 years old.
Yeah.
But it says 140 on it or 130, so it's part of your stock. When are they good forever?
Oh no, no. I mean,
Still considered part of your stock.
yeah. I mean, they're. I mean, to be honest with you, we've got poles that are very old. It's really kind of a case by case. It's not. I'm not going to say, well, this has an expiration date of 20 years after its manufacture date, but you really want to look at it. A lot of the time, you can take a look to see how's the tape holding up on it, or what's the bend looking like on it.
Yeah.
Is the top of the pole all chipped away and cracked? Sometimes what's the color of it? Did it start like a nice clear yellow and now it's this dirty brown? So I mean, they definitely have an expiration date, because overuse they're gonna dry out and start snapping. But yeah, you definitely want to keep an eye out and see how they're performing, especially. I've broken a few poles before, not because of age, but because of just the way that things work, and maybe things that we didn't necessarily see in the pole. And it's a very scary thing, and it happens. I will say one of the most important things that worked for me that I would think maybe work for others: if they break a pole, get them back vaulting as quickly as possible so that they get it out of their head. I know that after I vaulted, the first thing I did is I removed the debris, got another pole, got back on my mark, and went as quickly as possible so that I could just remember, okay, this is what a vault is, so that I don't sit there thinking, oh my gosh, I just did a backward somersault and a shard of a pole went flying by my head. So it's one of those things, keeping confident. But yeah, how often do you guys order? Do you replenish? I know.
I've been there for 6 years. Hasn't happened yet. We talk about it a lot, but it's just, you have a vaulter coming in and, they're not going to do indoors. Do you invest in just,
right,
meets? And so it's in that conversation, but if they're not going to commit to indoors, it's hard to make that investment sometimes.
One thing that I've noticed is if you're buying specific for an athlete, that's great and all, but you're looking to invest in the future as well. So if you want to map out what you have in inventory for poles, what heights do I have, what weights do I have, and kind of create
fill in the gaps.
And you want to fill in those gaps, because that vaulter might be great for 2 years. I mean, if they're a school record holder and they're a conference champion, then you might want to do something with that. But if you've got a vaulter that they're like, hey, they're doing pretty well, it's between me getting them something that's one step up over their pole, or getting something that can fill in the hole that's going to get another vaulter involved that might have a higher potential. That's where you kind of want to go to. So I like filling in the gaps, but understanding the transitions as well. Necessarily, you want to jump up weight before you start jumping up height. So if you've got a vaulter that's on a 12-foot pole, you can jump from a 120. Let's say they're on a 12-foot 130. The next jump would be like a 12-foot 140 or 35 or something like that, where you start jumping up in weight, so that it can go up a little bit higher. And then once they've gone, like for instance, I've got a vaulter who I'm trying to get him on a 15-foot pole currently, and he's a freshman, and so like he weighs 145. He's on a 145 14, and then he went to a 155 14, and then went to a 160 14, and then we dropped him down 14 6 145, 14 6 150, 14 6 155, and so on. Then we drop back down and get to a 15. I know the luxury of having that many poles, but
cha-ching, right.
Yeah, exactly. But like if you can kind of use that method of, okay, well, maybe he's crushing this pole, but we don't have one that's necessarily good enough for the next height, just move him up on a weight that can throw him up a little bit higher.
Yeah. One thing you may want to add to your talks is when I first went into this shed, and they had the poles, but the butt plugs were like totally mutilated.
Yeah.
And of course they say, the code is on the bottom, but you take off the cap and you look inside and it's on the bottom.
Yeah. I will definitely.
Everyone
That's one
knows
thing
that.
people just don't understand. They're like, well, I don't understand. This thing is completely destroyed. Where's the bottom? Has it rubbed off? But
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for, because they're all the different sizes too. I mean, it's crazy. You could have a 135 that has a completely different plug than another 135.
Well, that's
versus
when I was
your
at
Pacer.
college. If we bought a pole, we bought an extra plug to go with that pole.
Yeah.
You know, just automatically, and so you
Yeah.
had it forever.
And those things wear out for sure.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Jamie, anything from you?
No, Carolyn asked great questions. She's took a good chunk of mine.
Definitely.
So
She sounds frustrated.
I know the challenge with pole vault is obviously it's a difficult event, and it's hard to obtain the commitment of the equipment to accelerate them. So I guess actually on that note though, I want to clarify kind of a thought just before. So like say because I have a lot more male vaulters than I do female vaulters right now. So I'm going to just use them as the example. Like if I have a vaulter at like 145, I can have them. I'm not at a disadvantage if I'm having them on a 160 pole.
No, not at all.
Okay.
That actually is good.
Be more flexible, I can push them up the pole, and if I needed to be less flexible, I can push it down the pole.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's actually ideal. You know, you want vaulters vaulting on poles rated higher than their weights, because if a pole is meant to lift up a 150-pound person, and it's only having to lift up a 130-pound person that can put the same energy into that pole, then it's going to be shooting them higher because it's rated for someone that's much heavier.
Right. Okay.
So that's definitely good to have those vaulters using those bigger, and that's ideal. I mean, that's what you want to see. It's the problem is getting a 130-pound vaulter putting enough energy into a 150-pound pole and being strong enough to do that at 130 pounds. That's kind of the balance that you want to try and find. But if they're able to do that and they're able to load it up, game over. They're going to be getting thrown over much easier than that 150-pound person.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. So that's the balance. It's balancing the athleticism and strength of the athlete with how heavy that pole is to never exceed the weight of that
right
pole, but but I can drop and lower that weight rating in accordance with their strength. Okay, because I mean, I'll be honest, I was operating onto the fact like, hey, you're like 5 pounds under. This is your pole.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily ideal. Like just because if I have a lighter kid, I shouldn't be afraid to put them on a heavier pole if they're strong enough to manage it. Okay, cool.
No. I mean, that's where it gets really fun too, because then you start to see some pretty cool stuff.
Whee!
I love it. Awesome. Well, Tristan, I really want to. Carolyn, do you have any more questions?
I'm good. I'm just gotta work on the budget.
Right.
Well, now my vaulters, 3 of them graduated, so now it's like, okay, we gotta start all over again, because 3 years ago we had none, and we got some, and now they're gone, and
this is gonna be on video because I don't want to end the recording quite yet, because but Carolyn, we're neighbors here, so if you ever want to split a package for Patriot Pole, let us know.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, that would be pretty cool. Yeah, definitely.
Because I mean we're close enough, and again I think we could do it. And I only have 2. Like I think at a time, I don't know how many vaulters you have, but I only have like 2 or 3 at a time. It's not incredibly popular because of the difficulty associated with it. So if that's ever something you guys are interested in, let us know, because part of our challenge is like getting like who goes down to Boston to go, or who goes down to Mass to go get it and whatnot. And if we can help correlate that, we can bring some polls we would be happy to split it. Or at least I would. I don't know how Ryan would feel, but I bet I could talk him into it.
I'm thinking it was like $500. maybe.
I think it's $100 a pole, somewhere around there.
And it was a 5-pole minimum.
Yeah.
I just, I had 3 vaulters. Now I can't even think of one off the top of my head for next year. So I have to invent something.
Right. Right. Well, just let us know. Tristan, I want to thank you for your time. That was an excellent presentation.
Oh, thanks, guys.
I'm ecstatic about it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your talents, and I really appreciate it. Thanks, and thanks for coming out. I'm going to end the recording, and again,